Today I am going to be showing you how to part out a chicken, how to make your own chicken broth, and how to pressure can both the broth and some canned chicken as well. We're going to be canning up a lot of chicken breast today. If you are new here, welcome to Little Mountain Ranch. My name is Chelsea, and if you've been here before, welcome back. So we're going to get right into this because we have 50 chickens that we need to get through. And you'll notice that these are packaged chickens with a sales label on them, which means I did not grow these chickens myself. This is the first time in over 15 years that we decided not to raise our own meat birds this year. We knew that we were going to have an extremely busy summer, and we decided to take a break for a year. I don't know that we'll do that again. I have to say, though, it was really nice not to have to raise the chickens and especially not to have to butcher them. We usually do between 100 and 150 chickens at a time. And to be able to go into canning and getting them parted out today without having spent the last day doing all of the butchering, I have to say, I really do like that. Friends, I just wanted to jump in here and share with you about today's sponsor. I'm very grateful to be sponsored by Backwoods Home magazine. This family has been absolutely fantastic to work with, and this is a magazine that I have personally been reading for over 20 years. When I first started learning all these old-fashioned homesteading style skills, Backwoods Home magazine was the magazine that I would take out of the public library and learn a lot of the things that I know how to do now. You know what I love about these magazines is I feel like it is a different pace of content than a lot of us are consuming. You guys know I do long form content here on YouTube, and I kind of feel like this is the long form version of magazines. Magazines are usually filled with a ton of advertising, and while there's a little bit of advertising in here, for the most part, it's just really solid information written by real people and their real lived experience as homesteaders or people that are striving towards learning old-fashioned skills. And it just feels very old-fashioned and makes my heart feel good every time I pick one of these up from the post office and flip through it. And my kids really like these magazines too. They've learned a lot from them as well. I do have a 50% discount code for both Backwoods Home magazine and Self-Reliance magazine, and I'll put that down in the pinned comment and in the show notes below. And again, a huge thank you to Backwoods Home for sponsoring today's video. What was fantastic is I was able to get these chickens fresh instead of frozen, which was important to me because I make a lot of chicken broth out of the chicken that we raise, and I also can it as well. So to be able to get them fresh like this was fantastic. So thank you, Tracy, for making that extra effort to make sure that I could get fresh chicken. Here is my setup here, fairly simple. I have a couple of big bowls to put my meat and my bones into. I'll talk through the whole process of making the actual broth when we get to that point, but those two bowls are for that. I have my knives sitting here. These are Tramontina knives, and I have my chicken, of course. And I have a couple of chickens here. The rest of my chickens are in a fridge outside, so I'll just be bringing those as I need them. I also have a steel. Highly recommend having a steel when you're doing any larger cutting like this, because you do need to straighten the blade out with your steel every probably chicken or so, just to keep your knives sharp. Much more dangerous to do this kind of work with a dull knife than it is a sharp knife, mostly because you have to push down a little bit more if you have a dull knife, and then if you slip, the opportunity to really hurt yourself is there. So when you're using a steel, what you're actually doing is straightening out the blade, because as you cut, this blade is fairly fine on the end and it gets little kind of wiggles in it. I learned this from a butcher that we have that actually comes out and does some of our larger animals for us. And so you use the steel and you want to have it at about a 45-degree angle. I'm going to do this away from my cutting board because you don't want to get those little bits of metal that could come off onto where you're going to your work surface. And then you're running it along one side, running it along one side all the way to the end of the blade, and then along the other side. I always loved it. My dad was a butcher, and watching him do this, he would do this really, really, really fast. I don't do it very fast. And I usually do about 10 swipes per side of my blade. And then you want to make sure that you wipe off your blade before you go cut anything and keep your steel away from your workspace here. So there is our chicken. The way that I like to part out a chicken is I start with the drumsticks and the thighs. And this area right here, I take my knife and I cut along that. And then once I have the cut, all I do is push down and the joint pops right out. I hold the chicken up this way and cut across like so. So we're going to do the same thing with the other side. And I leave the wings on my backs. And the reason for that is because I'm going to be using the backs to make my broth with. I'm going to be roasting those in the oven and then making them with, turning them into broth. And what I do after they're roasted in the oven is I pull off any of the meat that I might want to use in stir fries or things like that. And then I vacuum seal those and the rest goes right into my soup stock. This makes a really nice, rich, meaty soup stock, which I like. So I'm going to leave the wings off, but for taking them off the bird, if you're wanting to have them separately, it's basically exactly the way we did the legs, where we're going to cut right here along. This one's actually already broken off, and then we would pop the joint out and then cut across like so, and then we have our wing. If you want to separate your thigh from your leg, you're going to cut it right along, exactly the same along the joint, break it apart like so, and then cut it. I actually need to sharpen my knives. These are used exclusively for butchering and meat cutting, and I don't think I sharpened them after butchering last year. But anyways, so now we have a wing, a thigh, and a leg, and then a thigh and a leg together over here. So I'm going to leave this wing on because, like I said, I like to leave mine on. And then for the breastbone, the breasts, I'm going to be canning this meat. So what I want to do is separate them, and I just take my knife and I run it along there like so. Definitely gonna have to pause and sharpen my knives. And then what I want to do is I just kind of use my fingers, and this part just takes some practice, and I want to go right along the breastbone, and we want to make sure that we're as close to the breastbone as we can possibly be. And then I usually just lift up like this and cut off the breast like so. I recommend for freezing meat, chicken or turkey, that you keep the skin on, even if you're going to remove the skin when you're going to do cooking. It does help to protect your meat from freezer burn a little bit, which is nice. So again, we're going to do the same thing here. Cut along the breastbone. And then I'm going to take my meat and pop it into my bowls that I have on the ready beside here. I'll throw this one into my soup stock bowl here. And then this is a back. There is lots of meat on back here. If you want to go in and cut that off, you can, but I'm just going to throw that right into my broth. So I am going to just get to this and get all of these chickens all parted out here. I don't know if I'll do all 50. I'll probably leave a few for roast chicken, but we'll get through most of them, and then I'll bring you back when we're going to do the next stage. Okay, so all I'm going to do here for getting these roasted is just put them on parchment lined paper. I kind of stack them and fit as many on as I can. And then these are going to go into the oven at around 350 to 400 degrees until they are nice and brown. And then we'll turn them into some delicious broth. My dad was a butcher pretty much my entire life, and I worked in his meat shop when I was a teenager, and he's since passed on, unfortunately, because I would really have loved to have shown him all the things that I've learned and all the things that I do now. And meat cutting is something I actually enjoy. I'm not a big fan of the actual killing part of it, although that is part of being a meat eater. So I think that it's a good thing to know how to do. But meat cutting itself, it's kind of an art to be able to do it and do it well. And I have always enjoyed it, which I know might seem kind of weird, but it's quite satisfying. Okay, so now that we have all of those cut up, I am going to get the breasts all cut up so that we can can them. So all we're gonna do here is cut the breasts into around inch size cubes. I'm taking the skin off for canning, and just around this size or so. And then we're going to add a little bit of salt to our jars, and that is it. And then right into our jars, which I have all washed and ready to go here. And we are going to be pressure canning. So when it comes to canning meat, you need to use a pressure canner. We use our canned chicken for all kinds of things, but primarily we use it for ramen and for soup, but our favorite way to do it is with chicken melts. So a chicken melt, I do have this recipe in the Little Mountain Ranch family cookbook. Hang on, I'm just digging through the meat here for the breast. There we go. And which basically it's chicken cut up. We put relish, zucchini relish in it. I know that sounds like a weird addition, but it's really good. Mayo, salt and pepper, garlic powder, sometimes some chopped up onions in it as well. And then put that on some bread, toast it in the oven, and then add some cheese on top and then broil it. It is so delicious, one of our favorite recipes, and we actually haven't had it that much this summer because we ran out of canned chicken in the spring. So this is going to be nice to be able to have this. I love having canned meat because it's so convenient, because it is already cooked, which is super handy. So I'm fitting around 2.5 breasts per jar for these chickens that are kind of an average size, probably what you would find if you were looking to purchase from a farm or you're buying from the grocery store. I'm going to be working through these pretty quickly, but I would recommend that if you're doing a larger quantity of chickens like this and it's taking you a bit of time, to make sure that you pause and disinfect your knives and your cutting board and things like that as you go, just to make sure that you keep the bacterial count nice and low. And then of course, make sure that your meat is really well chilled, even if it's partially frozen, even though it's hard to work with when it's cold like that. At least it is for me, my hands start hurting. But it does help to extend out the amount of time that you can work with it before you start getting bad bacteria growth. Okay, we're gonna add a teaspoon of salt. So whatever salt you're gonna use in your canning, just make sure it doesn't have any additives in it. So I'm just using a pickling salt here. And you can not add salt if you want. It's not a preservation thing in this case, just a flavor thing. And then we are going to top our jars off with some water. It is recommended to use water for canning because it helps the pressure be correct and the heat penetration and all that kind of safety stuff when it comes to canning. Yeah, you do want to make sure that you debubble with this because there's going to be a lot of air in between your chunks of meat. And use something non-metallic when you're doing this, and that way you don't scratch the inside of your jars and weaken the integrity of the glass. And you'll find when you debubble like this, you're going to lose a lot of liquid because that liquid's going to take space or take place of the air that you're removing out of the jar. So make sure that you take some more water and top it off. And you're wanting about 3/4 of an inch of headspace or so. And headspace, for those of you that are new to canning, is the space between the top of your product and the top of your jar. It doesn't hurt to do a double debubbling with chicken like this, especially if you have it packed in there fairly well. Okay, we want a clean cloth to wash off the rim of our jar here. Then we'll get these lidded up and put into our pressure canners. I have 3 pressure canners that I am going to be able to use today so that we can just keep all of this going through. Okay, we're going to lid up our chicken here. And, oh, I need to get a regular mouth. So I generally like to use wide mouth when I am doing anything that might be hard to get out of the jar, and anything that's liquid. So for my broths, I like to use the regular mouth lid. So the regular is that size, and then wide mouth is quite a bit bigger. These are much nicer for cleaning, I will say. They are so much nicer for cleaning, but I have a little scrubby with a handle that I use for cleaning these because my hand can't fit inside of those jars. But for liquid, they're great. Okay, we're going to ring these up just finger tight. We don't want to reef them on there too hard. And the ring's purpose is only to hold the lid down during the canning process. Once the lids have sealed, you can actually remove the rings. It's recommended to remove the rings, in fact, because it can give you a false seal, an impression that the lid is sealed when it's actually not. And also it's just, you just don't need it. So that way you don't need to have a ton of rings in your canning supplies, because I know canning supplies can be an issue. Where do you put them all when you're not using them? So you actually only need the number of rings that you would need to do a batch in a day, and then you can just reuse those and take them off your jars when they go into the pantry. So these are going to go over into the pressure canner. My favorite canners are the All-American canners. I just love them. I do have an electric pressure canner over there. It's a Presto electric canner. There's a lot of things I like about the electric canner. I love that it's kind of put it in and forget it. There's a few steps that you need to do throughout the process, but it isn't the same as a stovetop where you have to really watch your temperature and make sure that your gauge stays at the right temperature, because the electric pressure canner kind of does all that for you. With the manual pressure canner though, one thing I do like about it is I can see that it's at the right pressure, whereas with the electric pressure canner, I just kind of have to trust the machine to hold pressure correctly and all of that. And I find with this one, I can tell if the pressure drops, and I know that I need to restart my time. I'll show you all of that for those that are new here once we're kind of at that point. So I do like just being able to kind of put everything in and have it do its thing, but I guess I'm kind of old school, and I just prefer to be able to manually make sure everything's doing what it's supposed to be doing. I do have a really good canning guide that I wrote last year, I think, and thousands of you have downloaded it and said that it was helpful, so I really appreciate that. That's fantastic. But it's totally free. I'll put a link down below for you to sign up. All you have to do to grab it is sign up for my newsletter, and then you'll get a download link for it. And my newsletter comes out every Friday. I usually try to have tips, tricks, updates on what's happening here on the farm. And the only time we send out more than one newsletter a week is if we're holding a sale of some kind or we're launching a new product. Then you'll get a few more emails during that launch process. But for the most part, they come out every Friday, and we do try to make them really valuable for you. I am going to wait until there's steam coming out of here. It's very noisy, so I'm just going to explain this to you rather than show you this part. But once the steam comes out of there, I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to put my weight on. And my weight looks like this. And on the weight, it has, I don't have my reading glasses on, it has 10 pounds, 15 pounds, and 5 pounds. I'm going to be doing this for 15 pounds, but when it comes to your specific elevation, the amount of pounds of pressure that you're going to use on your steam canner are dependent upon your elevation. So you'll have to look that up yourself and see how much how much weight that you need. So once this is steaming, I'll be putting this weight on. I've said this before, but that's probably the most nerve-wracking part of this whole entire process. I still sometimes get a little bit of a jump when I have to go do it. But we're gonna put the weight on, and then once this gauge comes up to 15 pounds of pressure, we're going to adjust the heat on the stove so that it holds at that 15 pounds of pressure. And then we are going to set our timer at that point. If at any point during the canning process, this drops down below that 15 pounds of pressure in my case, so say it's 10 in yours, if it drops below the recommended pounds of pressure, then you need to bring it back up to pressure and restart your timer. That's the important part, is you need to restart your timer, because in order for your product to be safe, it needs to be held at that specific pounds of pressure for the allotted time frame. These are very noisy canners. When it comes to quiet, this one definitely takes the cake. It is not noisy. That's probably my favorite feature outside of just the convenience of it, is the fact that it's not noisy. This is very noisy. It's constantly making a hissing sound while you're canning. And you also need to babysit this one. Whereas this one, you can kind of get it going, and once it's actually doing its canning, you can get about your business and go do other things. Whereas this, I like to be in the vicinity of the canner while the process is going. All right, let's let this do its thing. And now we are going to, we don't have to do a lot of prep for our veggies for our broth. We're going to be making a chicken stock, so we're going to be adding vegetables to it. But fortunately, we don't have to do a lot of prep for that. I have a huge pot outside that we're going to be using to make our broth. I do have a little bit of prep work that I have to do to get all the veggies ready. So these are celery tops that I just threw in my freezer when I harvested all my celery. I think I did that with you guys a few weeks ago. That's just been sitting in the freezer. I'm going to throw a whole bunch of that because celery makes a really nice addition to soup stock. We're going to throw in a whole bunch of onions, and we're going to add the skins. The skins actually add a nice brown color to our broth, and we're going to be straining all this stuff out, so having the skins on isn't a problem. We're going to add some garlic and a bunch of carrots. So this is all food that we grew in our garden this year. These are our onions that we've been curing, so they're nice and cured now. They're doing great. So all I do with my onions is I actually just cut them into halves. Sometimes I'll quarter them. And then we're gonna go throw them in our pot. I will break off the tops of those, but same thing with the garlic, is I'll just throw them in with the skins. I'm not gonna peel them, but I will just kind of break them apart a little bit. And these carrots have already been scrubbed, so they can just go straight in. So let's take this outside and add it to our pot. All right, here is my cauldron. So we're just gonna throw our onions right in there, garlic right in there, carrots in there, and a bunch of our celery. This is my green stock, my herbs that I was growing in my green stock this year. So I'm actually gonna pull a bunch of herbs off of this. So in my, I think it was my tomato sauce video, I was saying not to use fresh herbs in canning because they can get a little bit bitter. It's better to use dry herbs. In this case, because I'm going to be making a stock and then I'm going to be straining out everything, it's totally fine to throw fresh herbs in there. So let's add some thyme. I was considering bringing this inside so that I could have these herbs last a little bit longer in the house, because we got our first light frost last night. I can see my breath in the air, so it is starting to definitely get autumn-esque vibes, but I don't know if I have room in my house for this. It makes me sad though, it's so beautiful still. Okay, right into our pot. Okay, this is the part I was talking about that can be a little bit scary, so I'm just gonna make sure we're at our 15 pounds. And on it goes. Okay, so now we're just going to turn this down a little bit and let this do its thing. It's gonna come up to 15 pounds of pressure, and then we're gonna set our timer for 90 minutes. And while this is happening, I'm going to get the rest of the chicken all jarred up and through the canners. And then when we are at the point of making our broth or canning up our broth, I'll be back with you. All right, friends, it is the next morning and I have all the chicken canned over here, and I wanted to show you something. So this is a jar of chicken, and this is pretty typical for the amount of headspace that you're going to have between your liquid and the top of your product. So don't worry if you ended up with some siphoning, or if your product absorbed a bunch of that liquid and you lost some of that liquid headspace. It's still totally safe as long as you canned it for the time period and the lid is on. This is an example of one that's a little bit better. You can see that the liquid is almost covering the top, but I put the same amount of chicken and the same amount of liquid, give or take a little bit, in all of these jars. And sometimes there's just a little bit of a difference. It seems to me that the pressure and temperature is a little bit more extreme when it comes to the electric pressure canner than the stovetop canner. And the reason that I say that is that even with the same amount of canning time, the jars just seem to be boiling way more vigorously in the electric pressure canner than they are in my stovetop canner. Also, it takes a significantly longer amount of time for it to cool down. And even when it says it's cool and then it says it's done, if I open up my canner and I don't give it another hour to cool off, I end up with siphoning with it. So just make sure that you keep that in mind, that it does take a lot longer and you want to give it even extra time, even when it says it's done, before you open the lid. So I'll show you what siphoning looks like. So this is a jar that siphoned. So this is the liquid level down here. Again, totally still safe. And this is one that didn't siphon. So a fairly significant difference there. So what siphoning is when there's a dramatic change in temperature, the liquid comes up and then comes out the top of the jar. And you do want to make sure that you double check the jars that have siphoned, that the seal is good still, because sometimes, especially if there's some fat in the product, it can affect the seal of your jar. So I just wanted to show you that in case you did it and you noticed that and you were worried about the safety. Still totally safe. So what we're going to do now is deal with the broth that we made yesterday. I let it simmer until about 8 p.m. last night, and then Dan helped me strain it. So I just strained it through a regular pasta colander, and just to get all the big bits out. And then I left it outside last night. It got down to, I think it was 3 degrees last night, so cold enough that I could leave these outside to allow them to cool enough so that I could skim off the fat off the top. Now, skimming off the fat off the top is not entirely necessary, but you can end up with issues with your jars not sealing properly, because the stuff in the jar is going to boil and it's going to come up to the top of the lid. And if you have a bunch of fat in it, it can get under the lid and affect the seal. So taking the fat off, or at least some of the fat off, is a good idea. If you put this in the fridge overnight, if you have room, which I did not, and thankfully it was cool enough outside to leave it outside, the fat on the top will solidify and makes it even easier to skim it off than what I'm doing right now, but this is still going to work just fine. So I think I said yesterday that you can this for 75 minutes, and for some reason, I have it in my head that broth is canned for 75 minutes, and I have always done it that way. However, when I shared this in a video a while ago, somebody said, "Are you sure it's 75 minutes? I always thought it was 25 minutes. So I did some research, and maybe the old way when I learned how to can, it was 75 minutes and then they changed it to 25 minutes. I don't know, but either way, for quarts, it is 25 minutes. And again, the amount of pressure is dependent upon your elevation, but 25 minutes is a lot less than 75 minutes. So I'm happy with that. As soon as you start adding solids into your, whatever you're canning, your products, that's really when you're needing those longer canning times. So my plan here is to do hopefully another 21 jars. I ended up parting out, I think it was somewhere around 40 of the chickens yesterday, canning all the breasts and then freezing in Ziploc bags the legs and thighs. And then I put the rest of them as whole chickens in the freezer, mostly because I was just done cutting up chickens at that point. I did want to have a few whole roaster chickens. I had a membership call last night. We have live Zoom calls every Friday, and one of my members was asking about the ratios of bones to water. So I told her I would count the bones that I had used in there and then kind of try to calculate the amount of water that I used. But I actually thought it was easier to explain it like this. I like to put enough bones, no matter what kind of bones that I'm using, into my broth so that the water just covers those bones. So once it starts cooking down, you're going to lose, like some of the bones are going to come out at the top of the water, which is totally fine. But I find that that amount of bone to water ratio gives me a really nice broth. Now, you've probably seen this around Instagram, YouTube about broth, and that what you're really wanting is a nice gelatinous broth because it pulls all of the good collagen out of the bones, and that's really good for your hair and your bones and your muscles and all that kind of stuff. So the reason that I don't worry about having a super gelatinous broth, I'm more interested in really good flavor in my broth than I am whether it's gelatinous or not. And that is because no matter how gelatinous my broth was before I put it in the pressure canner, by the time it's come out of the pressure canner, all of that gelatinousness is not there anymore. It's liquid, and it stays liquid on the pantry shelves. So I don't know if people have a different experience and they end up with a gelatinous broth even after running it through the pressure canner. But my thought is, because that has been my experience, that something is fundamentally changed in the collagen and all those other things that make it gelatinous is altered by the pressure canning. So it doesn't really make that much of a difference as far as from a nutritional standpoint. So that I am just pulling out of my experience, not from science. So if anybody has anything to counter that or a different opinion, certainly let us know. But yeah, that's my thought. I'm more concerned about flavor, and the flavor of this is absolutely delicious. Everybody was raving about how delicious this broth smelled while it was cooking. So what I'm going to be doing with all the other bones, because I ran this one through till 8 o'clock last night, like I said, I put those into bags in the freezer, and I'm going to be running another batch through today and another batch through tomorrow. I have enough bones to do two more batches of broth. So that is my plan, and hopefully that will give us enough. Where did I put that scoop? Oh, there it is. Hopefully that is enough to get us through. I am going to add a teaspoon of salt to my jars here. This isn't necessary, but you can if you want a little bit of a saltier broth, or you can just add your seasoning to it when you're going to use it. We use a ton of broth for so many different things. We use it to make a base for our ramen, which we like making. I use it to make gravy. I use it as a base for soups, of course. So as much as we can have this, you know, now that I'm thinking about it, since we normally do, this was only 50, and since we normally do between 100 and 150 chickens, this is not going to cut it, but it is what it is. Okay, I'm going to get these all run through our canner, and I'll be back with you when we're all done and show you what we ended up with. We ended up with 23 quarts of the chicken broth, and it turned out beautifully. I'm really, really happy with it. I also did 4 more quarts of tomato sauce, and this is just, I've just been cooking through cooking a small batch of tomato sauce every day, just chewing through the tomatoes that we picked out of the high tunnel. So I did that, and then I have all of the canned chicken that we did over there. So I'm really happy with that. That's going to load up the pantry. Feels fantastic. This is definitely not enough, but I have 3 more batches to run through, so that's going to be another, what is that going to be, around 48 more jars of chicken broth that I'll have with the backs that I have down in the freezer that I will be cooking up, and that should be a pretty good amount to get us through the winter. And then we also have all the chicken back there. It is now time for me to go. I'm just about to make dinner for my family. I'm just making some stuffed spaghetti squash here. So I'm just going to be filling this full of a delicious meat sauce and then covering it with mozzarella cheese and baking it in the oven. Super easy, very filling and delicious, and super healthy. We did our big squash harvest the other day, and I was absolutely thrilled with the squash that we got. This is going to be the first squash meal that we're going to have, the first of many, since we have a lot of squash to get through this winter. I hope that you enjoyed hanging out with me, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.